Thank you. Apologize for my voice this morning. So first, thanks to the organizers for putting together this panel. And I really want to thank Archbishop Jurkovic for your opening remarks. I think it's really important for people to understand that encryption is a tool that that's based in ideas that are, to a great extent, ancient, and that is privacy and security and freedom of expression, something that's obviously core to the church and to the way in which one interacts with clergy across religious disciplines. So I think this was a very interesting and important way to start this discussion. I want to try to address very quickly, because we don't have a lot of time. I know we have another panel at noon right after this. Three general points. So the first point is how is encryption a freedom of expression issue? Second, I'll say a few words about the framework for thinking about encryption under Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and then identify a few trends that I think are worth noting at this point. So, so the first question is how is encryption a freedom of expression issue? I think that as the discussion of the technical side of encryption made clear, encryption is a tool. It's only a tool that allows individuals to engage in expression in a way that's secure, protected, and private. In that sense, we can imagine all sorts of individuals who need encryption in order to communicate, and who, if they lack security in their communication, will likely be chilled, right? The individual who uses an electronic means to contact her clergy, for example, may not engage in that conversation in the absence of some form of protection. An activist, I know I sound very emotional, but it's really just, I get very emotional about encryption. When I was a kid, it was math that got me emotional, so I guess that's in a bad way. So we could think of any number of individuals who really require encryption in order to engage in communication, whether we're talking about activists, journalists who are protecting their sources. There was a very interesting story on the BBC within the last day or two about a young woman, a gay woman in Iran, who was really talking generally about her experience in Iran. And she didn't mention encryption, but she mentioned one of her concerns, which was that her phone could be confiscated by the police and could identify her contacts, her partner, and so forth. And encryption would protect her against that kind of intrusion. But of course, it's also a protection, as Bryan was saying, talking about a protection for spouses, for partners, for friends. And in fact, it can be a protection for criminals. So it's a tool that's subject to real substantial value, but is also subject to abuse, just like pen and paper can be subject to abuse. So what are the standards in thinking about this? So from my perspective, I mean, we can talk about the right to privacy under Article 17 of the ICCPR, but I want to focus in on Article 19 of the ICCPR, the Universal Declaration. So encryption, I think, has value in two legal respects. One is Article 19, paragraph 1 protects everyone's right to maintain an opinion without interference. Encryption protects us against interference, right? We're using our devices now for as places that hold our thoughts, our ideas, really our opinions, even when we're not communicating them with others. So in that respect, opinion is really protected by encryption. Second paragraph of Article 19 protects everyone's right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, through any media. So if we think about the kind of value in encryption, it's really protecting our communication. And so to the extent that it really advances expression, I think Article 19.2 is where we find real legal protection. Now, of course, Article 19.3 is where we get to the issue of trade-offs. And Article 19.3 permits governments to restrict freedom of expression, not freedom of opinion, which is inviolable, but freedom of expression, where the restriction is provided by law, and I think that secret law does not constitute as provided by law in the context of 19.3, and where the restriction is necessary and proportionate to protect a specific legitimate interest. And 19.3 identifies what those interests are, those interests being public order, national security, rights and reputations of others, and public morals. So I think it's imperative that where governments are going to restrict expression, and I would say restrict encryption, that they need to justify on 19.3 grounds. Now the problem, and here's the technical problem, is that whereas much expression may be targeted in very specific ways, say for example, incitement to violence, it's very difficult technically to restrict encryption in a way that does not affect every user of encryption on any device, right? So, for example, the debate over backdoors. If you create a vulnerability for encryption on one device, in all likelihood, that's a vulnerability for all similar devices. So it's very difficult, I think, as a technical matter, if not impossible, and this is based on technology, but also based on human nature and the viability of keys. Very difficult to have a restriction on encryption that is proportionate, even if you could satisfy a necessity ground. So this is really, I think, a fundamental problem, which is why the discussion over finding some compromise is so difficult, because it may be that compromise of encryption is kind of the pathway to undermining encryption across the board. That's a fundamental problem, and I think that that needs to be understood, and that policymakers and courts need to understand the technology and that fundamental problem. So let me just conclude really quickly with some of the trends that are out there. So I think on the one hand, we've seen the private sector, particularly since the Snowden revelations, and in the understanding that surveillance, digital surveillance is global. It's not just the Five Eyes, the US, the UK, and others, but it's really a global problem. The private sector is moving more and more towards encryption by design and default. We see that even this week in Apple's announcement about its new API and how others can engage with Apple products. At the same time that the private sector is moving in that direction, which I think is very positive, governments are moving to restrict encryption, or at least they're talking more and more about how to restrict the availability of encryption. But even there, I think what's interesting is that the public debate, part of this is because of Apple FBI and that litigation, but the public, I think, is increasingly coming to understand that encryption serves not only freedom of expression purposes, but also our very security. And so to a certain extent, and I think it's true, everybody in this room uses, I mean, to the extent you do your banking through a mobile phone, or you engage with Facebook or other platforms, you're already using some form of encryption in your life. You may not even realize it, and you're doing it repeatedly during the day. I think that people are responsive now to the idea that encryption is actually a personal security issue. So it may be that the arguments that resonate most publicly are not the freedom of expression issues, I mean, to my great sadness, but they're the security issues, the personal data issues, the economic kinds of issues. And my guess is that those arguments will increasingly be at the center of this debate, and hopefully push in a direction of protecting encryption that maybe as an incidental matter protects freedom of expression.